here, but I agree with Councillor Barker. We should be able to get the minutes out pretty quick and get them ratified by the chair. And so this would avoid this situation, because that was a very important resolution. But anyway, look, let's move on. We might just say that we receive the following reports.
I'll move that we receive the following reports.
Thank you, Councillor Barker. Seconded, Tom. All those in favour? Yours to talk?
The only thing, just one brief thing about is that, and because we need to have it updated and corrected, so the next time, so we'll then endorse it next time, but we'll receive it. I'll just make one comment here in response to the questions raised by Councillor Wilson about there being no business cases yet. I just say to Councillor Wilson, if there was a business case put forward today, I would view it with the utmost cynicism, because it's, in my view, this is far too early. I would expect a business case to come out of these things sometime down the track. We've got some more facts and some more plans. What we have is a clear stated intention, and once we have a clearly stated intention, we work our way through it. At some point, we'll have to come back with a business case, and then we'll scrutinise it. This is far, far too early. And if there was a business case today, it would be just fantasy. And I think the point about the whitebait, I'm really pleased to see the councillor Bevan's being engaged about whitebait. I hope to see him at the back of his yard there burning his whitebait nets as part of his protection plan.
Sorry,
Tom.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. You just moved a motion to just receive the reports. We do have items 2 and 3 that do need formal adoption.
Okay.
Already. No, the motion was to just to receive the reports.
Yeah, and to adopt. Okay, let's change. Are you happy to change that to adopt the formal recommendations? Tom, do you wish to speak? You're the seconder.
Concur. Who's the seconder?
Okay. Anyone else wish to speak?
I like that.
Therefore, all those in favour? Aye. Against? It's carried. Thank you for that really excellent debate. It's moving us along. Okay, so we have item 6, 7, sorry.
Mr. Mitchell's here to answer any questions. I think this one's been
Pest management.
pretty well.
I'm happy to
traversed.
move, Chair, if there's no questions.
I'll second.
This has been very well debated.
It has been really well debated, but sit down. Thank you very much for turning up and waiting so patiently. Do you wish to speak, Councillor?
Oh, just to say this has been a very well worked up process. I'd like to thank Councillor Bailey for stepping up and taking my place on the committee. I do feel I have a conflict, and I'm happy to declare that and remove myself from the process. And I wish councillors and the independent chair well in working through the submissions and delivering us a plan that will come back to council and we can discuss at that time.
Councillor Barker?
I'm looking forward to the next generation lifting the standard yet again.
Any other speakers? I would just like to add to that, this has been a great process, another great process that fostered by the Regional Council, and our staff have done a tremendous job, and so well done. They've disappeared. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Fixing the common seal.
Chair. I'll second.
Have a mover.
Just quick
before we
question,
do
though,
that.
Chair, just a quick question to our CFO. The leasehold land sales appear to be slowing. Is this just a age and stage thing, or are you getting how many left?
Probably an indication that the ones left are probably trickier in terms of larger number of properties on the title, which is unlikely to
The cross lease stuff.
result in.
But how many single titles are left? Do you know? Are they here?
123.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
We have a mover and a seconder. Do you wish to speak, Councillor Barker? You moved?
No, I moved.
Oh, you moved. Councillor Bevan?
And I don't either.
I don't. All those in favour? Aye. Motion is carried. Item 9, financial
Thank you, Chair.
update.
invite Manton to come up and answer questions. So we have been through a reforecasting process. So based on the first 9 months of the financial year, we've looked at actual spend to date and looked across the organisation in terms of expected spend for the full year to the 30th of June. Two, I guess, significant items, one in spend and one in cost savings. So the WCO expenditure is estimated to total $400,000 by the end of this financial year, which was an unbudgeted expenditure. Of that, 150 has been absorbed within existing budgets, and that is due to staff being otherwise, I guess, distracted from existing work that was planned. So that 150 has been offset against consultancy budgets within strategy. So that has resulted in an expected increase in the deficit of $250,000 at the end of this financial year. A number of additional unders and overs, which we have detailed in the report, and the most significant of those would be the savings on payroll. So we've had a fairly significant savings in payroll costs for the year, and that's largely because of positions which haven't been filled and the timing of replacing those positions. So in terms of the full year deficit, we don't need to make a decision today in terms of how we fund that. We have given you some options there of how we may choose to fund that at the conclusion of the financial year. So we're happy to discuss that today and also take questions regarding any of the content in the report specifically.
Thank you. Questions? Tom, then you, Neil.
On this item, bullet 5, about the unable to proceed with planned core work, could we just get some identification of that at some point? It would be useful, I think, to have that handy to us in some of the discussions we have with our various constituents about this whole brouhaha.
Yeah.
What important work of this council is being derailed or delayed because of this?
Sure, happy to bring that back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Manton or Jess or both. I'm seeing the projected deficit beyond the forecast of 250k, and the explanation essentially being around the water conservation order. Mm-hmm. Is that the
correct
rationale?
Yeah.
I just want to ask about the budget provision and or overrun on the Havelock North water inquiry and expenditures around the legal costs for that. Can you confirm that those costs, well, firstly, where would they fall in terms of your group activities? Mm-hmm. Which line item would I look at to capture those?
So they fall under regulation. So
under regulation?
we created a project at the time for that. So that's in those cost figures, but it is fully funded by that reserve that we, sorry, what's the right word for it? The disaster damage reserve, which we resolution last financial year
so
to do that.
It's sort of financed offline almost.
Essentially, it kind of zeroes out on this report.
That's fine, but
Yeah.
there's comfort in knowing that matched that budget expectation. There's no overrun on that offline transaction?
No, we didn't budget for it as such, but yes, this is within that kitty that we talked about at the time.
Sure, okay. I just want to go a little further down. So sitting, I'm unclear from this accounts that the entire, if you like, overrun, the $250,000 overrun, sits fairly and squarely with the water conservation order.
Yes, so there's a number, as I mentioned, so there's a number of unders and overs, and basically most of the unders and overs offset each other, so there's a significant savings on payroll, which would basically offset all of the additional costs.
Sure.
And then the water conservation order totals 400. 150 has been offset against existing strategy consultancy
Sure.
budgets,
Okay.
which leaves 250 which effectively we can't
And
fund from anywhere
deteriorate
within our
position.
existing budgets.
So can I just take you to governance and community engagement? So can I read from that and your paragraph 5, sorry, your governance heading, you've got contingency fund. So essentially we're drawing down on the contingency fund
Correct. Yeah.
to that level,
Yeah.
and we're nevertheless still 250,000
That's
shy.
right. Yep.
Okay. Sorry, just to continue a little further, can I go down to regional income? We've got an investment company, HBRC, the dividend. Is there any sense that we can make up revenue from the port in regard to dividend to the $250,000? Can we
So
ask
we haven't
for
had that discussion yet.
Okay. So there is an opportunity there to seek a greater level of dividend from the council?
Potentially, if council resolved that they wanted
I'd love to do that.
conversation to take place.
Going to the second line item, Naroro water investment, a $50,000 less than expected provision there.
Yeah. I'll ask Matt to-
Is that unforecast? So there's nothing expected from in May, June that would turn that around or make it worse?
No, so that is purely based on this time last year, our annual plan.
Yes.
The process of the Narora was still going ahead
Yes.
as such, and we were going to put for, I think it was over 1.5 million into that in the first year, and we were going to get 6% return on that, and that was where that fell into our budget. So we've never, pretty much 2 months after that, we knew that we wouldn't receive that income because everything got put on hold. So we weren't going to put that funding in, and we wouldn't receive the return. So this is really just the reforecast saying that we won't get that 50,000 which we had originally budgeted.
Sure, I understand that, the maths of that. But given that we've disposed of the majority of the board for that, can we expect some dividend from that rather drastic action on the composition of HBRC to reflect in the accounts?
Yeah, we haven't factored that into the current year that we're in. For the LTP, that's probably coming into the reckoning now that this has all come about. So, yeah, you're probably right. There is potentially some more flow through from HBRC.
I'd make the observation that there are additional costs associated with the sale of the RWSS assets that will also need to, which will starting to be accrued now. So there is work underway to support the sale of those, and that they're going to create a financial drain on HBRC to some extent.
Nevertheless, could that be treated as a cost of sale and recovered from any capital return?
Oh, look, and there's $20 million worth of cost of sale almost in a sense. So we're attempting to recover absolutely everything we can from that process. It won't be easy. There are some landowner commitments in relation to the RWSS, and some of those agreements involve potentially some sharing of costs to those landowners as we unwind ourselves from those obligations. So, look, I just wouldn't want to give you any cause for optimism that there's any upside in relation to this.
Well, I
transaction
wonder
at
just,
this point in time.
sorry to dominate that discussion, Mr. Chair, but I wonder whether we can look closely at those opportunities to try and balance this equation,
Yeah,
or at
and we
least pull
certainly
back
will
that-
bring you back, obviously, a full year set of accounts, and this is just an estimate of where we think we're likely to land at the end of the year, but there's likely to be some movement between.
And finally, you've managed to squeak 61,000 out of our ratepayers in uniform charges and general charges. Is there a reason that that's is a favourable outcome when we ought to have been reasonably precise with?
I think
with
there's
both
always
uniform
some
charge
small
and
minor sort of tweaks in terms of the total rates that are recovered to what we plan for, and that's in terms of actually the number of ratepayers, and there are different factors.
Look, I'd make the observation that $11,000 out of $25 million rate take is probably pretty close to precision on all of this. And look, can I just make the observation overall? We've probably provided you a little bit more information this time than we might have done historically around the overs and unders. And the overs and unders is obviously a perfectly normal part of balancing our budgets given the dynamic environment we operate in. But one of the themes you'll see through the unbudgeted expenditure through here is a degree of ad hoc things which have occurred in the last 12 months. in response to organisational imperatives, including direction from council. So a consequence of asking for things to be done or doing things a bit differently through the year is that we're going to have deviations, and that requires a whole bunch of management over and under.
Yeah, thanks, Jess. I'm not sure whether I'm talking to either of you, but one of you I'm sure will answer. So I'm looking at overhead costs, and if it wasn't for staff vacancies, the overhead cost wouldn't be $68,000 unfavourable, they'd be $220,000
That's right.
unfavourable. And if we've got staff vacancies, it means that we're not fulfilling the tasks that we're supposed to fulfil. So it's not good either way.
necessarily a
Yeah,
good
it's
thing.
not good either
That's
way you look at it. So, and I noticed some of the line items then there involve reorganisation and so forth. So my question is, looking forward to the next year, are you satisfied that we're not going to have a $200,000 blowout in this area?
Yeah, we're certainly looking at that, and in terms of whether or not we think that the salary costs will come in sort of on the mark in terms of what we've expected in the LTP, we'll be reviewing that as we've actually produced all the job descriptions for the new roles. We're currently sizing those, so we're ensuring that what we've forecast is actually in line with what salary expectations will be to fill those positions, and then we're also having a look at timing in terms of what's in reality practical of bringing those new staff on, so we don't have a significant savings, and likewise we don't have a significant blowout. So we are working through those calculations over the next couple of weeks and having a look at that.
So can I just make one other observation? So going into the organisational reviews and the reorganisation, we had no budgets to undertake that activity. So one of the things which sort of surprised me coming into this role is that the Chief Executive didn't have any financial resources to do anything, frankly, and there was no ability apart from the contingency. So there were no budgets to do things like performance reviews across the organisation or to undertake any reorganisation. So I faced a choice as to whether to come back to you and ask for approval for unbudgeted expenditure or to try and live within our means. And we were conscious of the fact that we had some vacancies within the organisation and we had therefore a bit of headroom. And so we've tried to work within that. And so we've essentially tried to self-fund it, and that's why we've ended up broadly balanced.
Thank you, Chair. I've got two questions. Just looking at emergency management, are we going to spend that budget this year? He's only got a few weeks left. And I guess as you answer that, is that money that we've collected, or is that money that we've collected off the TAs, or does that not differentiate?
So the total budget includes both,
Yeah, right.
what we've collected and so the total income picture remains static. We've had some vacancies, had some turnover in that area this year, and as a consequence, we're going to have a modest underspend there.
Okay.
Yep.
So the next question is, are we getting close to a time when we start, as we head into our hearing, next month, of what we're going to roll over for the year? How much are we going to be rolling over?
So we've just gone out to staff now to collect that information, so we'll be bringing that back to you during that process. And certainly we are encouraging people, if there is work that can be done within this financial year, we encourage them to do so as opposed to rolling the funds forward. But you will have transparency around those numbers.
Oh, I expect that, but I'm just, you've got no idea how much that will be.
I think it's going to be less rather than more, and the reason that we're putting the pressure on staff not to ask for carry forwards is precisely because we're staring down the barrel of a deficit for the year that needs to be funded. So underspends will need to go to supporting as close to a balanced budget as possible, as opposed to rolling that funding forward. And yeah,
I don't have a feel for what that number is yet. I'm not sure if Manton does.
Supplementary then, how do you reconcile that with the auditor? Do they? It gets very complicated, doesn't it? As complicated as it's been by the sounds of things. But.
So the audit will always look at your annual plan budget for the year. So if we haven't spent what we've said we'd spend, they will ask questions about that. And the answer to that may be that we've carried it forward, or we've actually been unable to do this for a particular reason, and they will ask those questions.
sorry, Chair, just with your indulgence, they won't accept the fact that we can use money we've saved here to rob Peter to pay Paul. Sorry, Peter and Paul.
To a certain extent, as long as the process has gone through. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. 7.3, it's kind of made a decision. We've got to make a decision. You're talking about operating reserves, and that they're being run down, obviously, or reduce it completely. How do we? I'm just a little bit of an explanation as to how we build up those operating reserves.
So operating reserves, we try to keep around 3 million as our operating reserve, and that acts as a cash flow through different times of the year, because obviously our income is rather lumpy based on the dividends from the port and obviously once a year a rate take. So those are the reserves that we're talking about. It's very hard to put a figure on it at any one time, depending on where we are at the year. So I think further on in this report, we usually give a reserve breakdown. So on your page 59 is kind of our reserve breakdown there. So our operating reserves at the end of March is 2.2 million, and I'd expect that to dwindle a little bit until we get our final dividends in June. That's just the usual flow of things. So we have a little bit to play with, but obviously the more that we use up in any particular year for unplanned deficits, that dwindles.
Can I sorry, Chair, through you, at some stage, man, can I come down and have a sit down with you about how those reserves are actually built up? Because I still don't have an understanding of, because the money's got to come from somewhere to be slipped into reserve.
Oh, sorry. So they don't. Yeah. So this is historically carried forward. What we've got is our operating reserve.
Right. Okay.
And ups and downs on different years, depending. So if we carry forward $500,000 into next year, then technically we've.
Okay, Paul, I'm pretty sure
saved
Manton will be
$500,000.
happy to have a cup of tea with
Yeah.
you and go
Yep.
through that.
Do that.
Alan, and then do you, Debbie.
Saying that the figure you need to carry now is 3 million. I thought it was 2.
Yeah, we haven't got a hard and fast rule. It's around that, and it changes daily based on cash flow. So we try to keep those reserves around that figure.
So you don't anticipate that at year end your reserve will be sufficient to fund the 250?
No, it absolutely will be. But if
Will.
we keep that as a practice going forward, then
Oh, you can't do it forever.
exactly. So that was really what that comment was trying
Right.
to.
So that is one solution. The other question I was going to ask is if hypothetically the RPC cans the oil and gas plan change, how much will you save in this financial year that could go towards the deficit?
So off the top of my head, I think we've probably spent 50 or 60,000 of 150 that was remaining in that account. So in the order of $100,000. But of course that funding has been borrowed for one. So
It was borrowed.
Yeah, for the specific purpose. So you'll need to make a decision about whether you essentially just pay off debt with it, or whether it gets tipped into operating, which might have some accounting complexities to it. So there is a question about how fungible that funding is for other purposes.
Okay.
And it will require a resolution of council to resolve what to do with that,
Right.
following any decision by the RPC to then cease the planning work.
Yeah. All right. Well, I mean, it seems that the only practical way to do it on this occasion, but not again, is operating reserves less any contribution that might come from a couple of these other sources. Would you agree with that, Jess?
Yeah, I mean, that seems like a good practical solution, and as I mentioned, we're likely to have some movement between, what we're expecting to come in by the end of the year, and some of those carry forwards may be released to offset some of the deficit. So We will obviously bring back the numbers to you at the conclusion of the year, and we can have a further discussion around how to fund it and make some
So when do you want a
recommendations.
decision?
We don't need to make a decision about how to fund the deficit today. We'll do that at the end of the financial year.
Thank you. Debbie, do you?
Thank you. I appreciate what you've put up here today. Well, my question is just with regard to the land drainage and river control, and there's 19k unspent in Central Hawke's Bay, and due to lack of specific projects, but I'm driving around and seeing Old Man's Bed just in very public spaces. So can that, I mean, is that not a suitable project, because it's sort of pretty glaring at the moment?
So Old Man's Bed is funded out of biosecurity funds as opposed to land drainage, so it doesn't come from this area, unfortunately.
It seems like a lot of things that need doing down there. So
Yeah, well, look, I think in terms of Old Man's Bed, you know, we could
what else could it be going?
we could spend an
rather
awful lot.
than spending-
Well, the 19,000 is going against those unfavourable expenditures in other parts of that area, and the land drainage and river control team are striving to come in on budget at end of year. And as I said before, within any operational area, there's always overs and unders, and in this case, obviously the West Shore renourishment has been more expensive than it has been in the past, and that's probably a reflection of the contracting environment that we're in at the moment. We are hearing about enormous pressure out there on contractors, and that's flowing through to rates and what have you. So that's a challenge for budgeting.
Thank you, James. I think that's... Fenton, do you have something, another question? Because I have just one.
A very tiny one, Chair. On page 59, Ngāti Pahuwera Reserve Fund of 144,000. Just refresh my memory. Is that part of the 2 million that we took on their behalf of the settlement, and that's what's remaining after what's been planted, or probably too much detail for
Yes, essentially.
staff around the table? But
Yes was the answer.
Yes.
it is
Yeah.
that. It's
So-
not.
No, I've
It's
just
not
got one
gravel
question,
royalty.
No.
Okay.
I just have one small question before Neil wants to move here. Just on the balance sheet, that $20 million movement from March to this March, and it dropped down from the when sort of there's a movement of $20 million in the infrastructure asset. What is that?
There was the
No,
revaluation at the end of last year, end of June. So that
But it
is-
bounced back up.
Sorry, the 52 was before the valuation, and the 72 was
55.
after.
And infrastructure assets, we've got a movement of 20 mil.
Yeah, so it's increased from last year, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the revaluation movement. So that
Oh, so
asset
it's a
has increased.
revaluation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Happy to move.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. Seconder, Councillor Barg, do you wish to speak?
Yes, I do, Mr Chair, and I certainly want to thank Jess and the team and Management Co for producing an excellent report. This is, in my mind, a very substantial forward move in terms of reporting, and I really appreciated the breakdown by the particular blocks. That was excellent work. In terms of content and where we're sitting for the year, a deteriorated position of 250,000 moving up to 700,000 deficit for the year, clearly not a sustainable thing for us to be doing, and appreciate the work that's going to try and resolve that, and certainly encourage turning over a few of the obvious stones, and obviously the port dividend is one of those, and I wish you luck with that, but it's certainly, given the port situation, we ought to be able to call upon that. One of the things that concern me is the expenditure by way of drawdown on reserves for the Havelock North situation. I, in hindsight, regret supporting that move. I think that should have been in camera, part of this year's expenditures, and not to have been, if you like, hidden from line of sight for the public to see what that tragedy has actually cost this council. It's somewhat hidden in this regard. One of the other areas that I think, one of the stones that I think could be looked at is the Civil Defence and Emergency scenario where the cost of that, even though it's reduced, and we're still a deficit situation of 400 and something thousand, I would suggest we turn to our colleagues in the local authorities to help fund that deficit situation. I wonder whether there's scope, in fact, to do that. We ought to be sending a bill. We've done a lot of work on behalf of the local authorities. I believe it was billable work, and we ought to actually send that account out and ask for that money from our colleagues in it. It's a collective and collaborative approach, but we're doing the paying. So that's one area I'd like to see potential explored, at least on what could be done. But look, well done to the team. I think it's excellent work. You've really looked at this, and I think it's good governance that we get a report of this quality.
Thank you. I too would like to say an excellent report, but I'd like to step back about 3 or 4 steps and say it's an amazing position that an entity this size is in. We were quibbling over such small numbers. In actual fact, this is landing a 747 on a fishing boat. Really, there's so many moving parts here, and we've got within this close. It is actually, I think, a very good report. Actually, when we're down to looking at these things so much at the margin, and yes, we talk about unsustainable and those things, but I think in actual fact, this organisation is in a very, very healthy financial state. That's the truth of these accounts.
Yep, thank you, Chair. I have to endorse Councillor Barker's comment there that at the end of the day, given the amount of revenue or an expenditure that goes through this organisation, to be quibbling about little numbers at the end of the day is quite heartening. But what I would like to comment on and congratulate the staff for is in the table on page 56 with the accounts payable, that we've dropped from 798 accounts being between 1 and 30 days to 568, and that the ones over 91 days have gone from 45 down to 1. I think that's a really good sign that we're looking after our suppliers and paying them on time. So thank you very much for that.
Any other speakers? Before we go back to our mover, you were the mover, weren't you? Yes. I just want to make one comment. I agree with all the comments that have been made about this report. It is just enormously frustrating to me that we are out of kilter with our budget due to water conservation order. It was always unbudgeted. It was a spurious attack on our community, and we have had to fight it. And it annoys me immensely that we've spent $400,000 of our ratepayers' money fighting a bunch of bureaucrats in Wellington who want to put their edict on our river. So I just want to make that comment for the record. Councillor Curtin, do you want to wind up? All those in favour? Aye. Against? It's carried. Okay. Report from the Maori Committee.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Just my apologies for not being here at the start of the meeting. I was just coming in, and the chairman of the Whakakiri Lake Trust asked if he could have my ear for a few moments. And it was particularly pertinent to me because some of the activities there resulted in a letter to the Minister of Conservation criticising some of the work I've been involved in the last 15 years. And also that meant that I wasn't here when the minutes were approved, and it just states in the minutes that my attendance was what the wording is. I was not in attendance. I did send apology by email to the chair and deputy chair and the CEO. I was in Chatham Islands that week, so just for your noting. Yes, it was very good in Chatham Islands, as Councillor Barker expressed his jealousy. Thank you. We discussed the long-term plan, and I'm having to do this from my feeble memory, because I haven't had a copy of the minutes yet. And there was sort of a theme around members that Joyce Ann should be putting in a submission on behalf of the Māori Committee, but nobody had an idea of what they actually wanted to put in. And so I turned the tables a little bit and said each of the Tai Whenua should put their own submission in. And as a result of that, we don't have any submissions. But I attended two of the, what do you call them? The meetings, one at Havelock and one at Central Hawke's Bay. And I noted in both of those there was only 2 Maoris. At Havelock it was me and my daughter, and me and Chocky at the Central Hawke's Bay one. So there is actually and I understand there was very low attendance at the Tai Whenua in Hiratona. So there's actually a lack of interest at that level. If you get Māoris together, another one I attended was the treaty groups, and they in turn, one of the things that they didn't argue about, they never mentioned once the rates. This is with the treaty groups. It didn't seem to bother them that there was a lot of money being paid. They wanted to talk about other things. So it just gives you a different, what I'm trying to say is it's not so much lack of interest, it was just a different perspective of how the long-term plan is evolving. One thing they did say about the long-term plan, they expressed in terms of the appointment of the tumuaki, asked if they could be involved in the job description. And I think the same sort of sentiment came from Toro on behalf of the Regional Planning Committee. As usual, the highlight of the meetings is actually the talk given either by the CEO or, in this case, by the chairman, who runs through a raft of matters that are going on with the council. That is actually held in very high regard by the members. They're just so interested in that low-key, non-written stuff and the ability to be able to come backwards and forwards and ask questions. There was also talk about the afforestation project, and a little bit, so how does this relate to Māoris on the ground? A general feeling was, and interest is actually in the planting of native trees. And once again, they sort of wanted to know what were the pathways to it. And I did explain to them that in terms of it's sort of you don't get an allocation of money, you have to put a proposal in, and there has to be some sort of legal mechanism to make sure things are going right. So in the absence of any minutes, that's as far as my feeble memory can recall. But thank you for the members that attended.
Thank you, Mr. Mohi. I just want to add one thing. The item of eels was raised at the Māori Committee. Not sure, I can't remember. And it did highlight a lot of real interest and discussion around this topic. We're very fortunate to have Katarana from Wairoa present, and she's done a huge amount of work on eels and knows a lot about the subject. But finally, what we did ask staff to bring us back to the Māori Committee, a report on eels in Hawke's Bay, highlighting, what is the catch, what are the species here, what's the commercial catch, what is happening in that space, so that we can take it further. So I think it was a really big step forward, and I'm just hopeful, I have a personal hope that one day we'll be able to protect eels and that they will be the protected species in our area, other than some imported species, that we recognise the value of eels in our streams, and we stop plundering them as we are. So that report is coming back, and there's been some discussion about that, but the Maori committee really look forward to that.
Also, I'm not sure whether this was in the formal part or the pre-formal meeting, but talking about representation on the Maori committee. As you know, we have 3 members from each of the 4 tai whenua. There has been called from some quarters for Maori to be represented at on the Maori committee. There's none of the Māori members on the committee that agree with that. Otherwise, we'd have to have the meetings in the Assembly Hall.
There's also a call for the treaty claimant groups to be represented on the Māori committee. So there is a big discussion to be had on the representation and the status of our Māori committee. But at the moment, it's one of the committees that I particularly enjoy, and I know the other councillors that attended also enjoy. Is there any other comment from people that were there? Paul, you were there.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chair. You certainly, the discussion on eels was quite important, and the fact that we've asked staff at some stage to come back with a report. Is that something that should be reflected again? Is that something that should be reflected?
I would have thought so, but it's not.
Yeah.
There wasn't a resolution passed.
Not sure if it was a formal resolution.
Just so it was an ask for a report.
Well, there's no. I haven't received the minutes, so I'm not quite sure what the story was.
Do we have
Chairman, through you, Mike, the remuneration review, what was the attitude towards that?
No, we didn't discuss it. Liz Lambert had it on the agenda and just said that she didn't have any more information.
I'll move that we accept the Māori committee report. Second, Paul. I have no further discussion. Do you, Paul? All those in favour? Aye. All right. Against? It's carried.
Just received the minutes, thank you.
Hawke's Bay staff council projects. We always get a bit of discussion
So look, we'll just take questions on
Tom,
this.
then Fenton.
Chair, though I just would note that I think it represents a pretty solid level of activity right across the organisation at the moment, so there's plenty on.
Mr. Chairman, I have three points to raise. Item 5 refers to the Drinking Water Joint Committee. One question, one observation. Do we have a chair yet for this?
Yes, we have a nomination for the chair. Mr. Garth Cowie has made himself available, as I understand it, and so the committee will resolve will consider a proposal for him to be appointed as chair.
Cool. And secondly, on this, I've raised before, and I would like some guidance, a concern that I think the mandate of this committee, which arose out of the inquiry process and was focused, therefore, specifically on drinking water, should be broadened to provide a governance forum that is looking at drinking water, wastewater, stormwater, all as a package of issues. And I'm one of this council's representatives, I think with Paul, on this governance group, and I guess I want to understand whether in doing, am I pushing my own barrow in terms of pushing this notion to other members of this joint committee? What do other councillors think about this? I mean, my point of view about this is that drinking water can't possibly be dealt with in isolation from these other two waters, even from the narrowest perspective of what we see as the obvious impact of stormwater problems in Napier drinking water. as one instance. But there are many other linkages, as we know, between these various areas. So the only other place where any kind of collective strategy or forum for raising concerns about this would exist would be in the chief executive's chairman's group. But I assume that has an unlimited mandate. It could, there's lots of things it could be talking about. Water being a rather important subject, it does seem to me that this might be an opportunity to make sure that collective attention is put on. We've made our submissions, or will be making our submissions to the LTPs of the other councils, where we are probably in each case speaking to their water infrastructure investments and that sort of thing. And then, you know, after that, you know, it's sort of done. So I would see this forum as a place to keep the spotlight on the need to be collaborative and aggressive in addressing these interrelated issues, and hopefully the other councillors agree with that and would support my advocacy of that. That's a question to the group.
Can I respond? I'm opposed to the idea. Quite simply, that wastewater is this council's responsibility. We are the regulator, and our statutory obligation to be the regulator. I would not agree to us contracting out that to another group. The second thing I'm opposed to the idea on is I think the focus on this group is to provide safe drinking water, and that's a very worthy and noble cause, and I would not want that group to be have its vision blurred by two other competing interests that it's got to deal with. The third objection I have is it won't have the resources to go and do all of the three things that Tom's suggesting for. We would have to take money out of our regulatory function to hand to them to go and do that. So I'm opposed to it.
Well, Mr. Chair, I'm wildly enthusiastic about the proposition. I think it's the obvious place to go. Just as drinking water is regulated by this council, we could similarly have some level of governance input and collaboration across all councils. I think it's a worthy idea, and its time has arrived. I think we should get on and, if not this particular committee, then one soon based on its model, the model being introduced for both stormwater and wastewater. We need to treat this as a collective. The issues are equally as dire with those other waters as they are with drinking water, critical to the health of the region, and I think we need to do it straight away. I think one of the things that occurred to me in observing the Hastings District's long-term plan was the road to Damascus understanding of their drinking water issue and the investment of many millions of dollars to remedy that problem, but the dire deficit of spending that they've got in terms of their other water issues. We need to address this front on, and any forum to do so should be invited to do that with urgency.
It's a huge issue, isn't it? It's a bit off the topic, whilst it's on the topic.
Chairman, I'm not proposing that we approach this as a matter of shifting authorities for any of this activity. Every one of these councils has its various legal responsibilities in one or another or all three of these areas, and that's fine. What I'm suggesting is that there's an opportunity here to have a forum that keeps a public spotlight on what the collective effort is, and whether everybody is carrying their weight in achieving the goals that we want to achieve with respect to clean, safe water in our region, or at least in terms of the core Haratunga Plains area of it. So it's not changing the distribution of power here. This is a matter of keeping public attention really clearly focused on the three councils that are involved here in this important area. And if we just sort of wave our hand at the LTPs and walk away and go back to our normal business, I think we're missing a real opportunity here. Apart from the practical aspect that, as I said at the outset, one cannot deal with drinking water in isolation from storm water and wastewater. It just doesn't work that way. And so it's sort of an arbitrary fracturing of what the real issue is.
The 5 councils involved in this exercise, because Wairua has now joined the committee formally and will have its representatives at the upcoming meeting, have each individually endorsed a terms of reference for this committee. So obviously any amendment to that would be something that would need to be endorsed by the collective. And I suggest the mechanism for that would be a recommendation from the Drinking Water Committee itself back to the 5 councils to broaden its mandate, if that was the will of the committee. I just make the observation that we've got a challenge just getting on top of drinking water infrastructure in the region and the regulation and management thereof. So there's a degree of walking before we run. But look, I met last week with Department of Internal Affairs senior officials in relation to the Havelock North Drinking Water Inquiry. There is a cabinet paper which has been approved by cabinet but not yet released. And announcements from the Minister of Health and other ministers on that are imminent. Will be in the next week or thereabouts, and then we will know what the government's response to the Havelock North Water Inquiry looks like. It does seem that there will be some new institutional arrangement in relation to the regulation of drinking water, so I think we need to understand what that looks like and roles and responsibilities for this committee and for ourselves in that context. But there is also, from my discussions with them, obviously some ongoing policy work around Three Waters infrastructure, the regulation of the performance of that infrastructure, the funding of it, and the government is looking quite fundamentally at institutional arrangements across local government on all of this. So I think it's quite a fluid space, and we could see some quite significant changes in the not too distant future. So look, my recommendation to the council and to the committee would be to get this work program around drinking water well and truly gripped up and underway. Get this committee working well. Take cognizance of what's happening at the national level in terms of changing regulatory responsibilities, and then make some decisions about the evolution of this committee, probably within the next 12 months.
Okay, I think we've got to move on from this. Ricky, you got Alan wants to talk. You're on the same side?
Yes.
Okay.
Just
quickly.
2 points I make briefly.
And then Alan.
One is that this is such a significant decision. I am opposed to this process where it's raised at the last minute of a meeting as a suggestion on a fly. It should be well considered. The second thing is I agree with James's point about quite fluid. We've got the Royal Commission inquiry which has started, We don't have that for the broad thing. In response to Neil's point, it seems to me that there are issues in the wastewater, stormwater thing, and having a structural change is not going to solve the political problem. This is an issue. Getting these things fixed is a matter of politics, and councils is applying funding and resources to do it. That's what the problem is. And having a structural change will not fix a political problem. So I think we're misapplying the wrong tool here.
I think the discussion, I think you made your first point's the right one. Alan?
Changing the subject, the last item there, road safety, the Hawke's Bay Road Safety Expo on between the 7th and 11th of May. Now, I'd recommend certainly any councillor or interested staff who haven't been to one of these, and there wasn't one last year, but it actually targets all of the high school students in Napier and Hastings, and I think Central Hawke's Bay as well, at the stage where they're considering getting their driver's licence. It's done very, very well, and there's also benefit in councillors being seen to support this thing. So I'll actually get Anne or one of her staff to email out to everyone times and opportunities for people to attend.
Thank you. Fenton, and then we'll come back to you, Tom.
Just a very brief question, I'm not sure it can be answered here, but the East Mangoni catchment flood 100-year return period, flood report is being prepared. Will that be a comparative report as what happened in 38, or whenever the big flood was in the East?
The work that Craig Goody has done modelling has done some contrasting with 38
So it will do
previous
some of
events. Yeah, no, I believe so. How comprehensive, I couldn't tell you, but yep.
Tom?
Yeah, I had two more. 40, the Port of Napier Wharf Extension application. I thought this had already been notified and submissions are where?
Yes, it has, and submissions close on the 1st of May, so yes, it has been. That's out of date.
Do we have any sense of what the volume is? What kind of?
No, I couldn't tell you at this point.
Number 44, this meeting seems to have popped on and off our calendar. Is this our meeting?
This is our meeting.
It is our meeting and it is happening?
Correct, and there's just been delays in getting this set up, given the the availability of venues, but also it's taken longer to progress the legal enforcement issues in relation to the company, and it was my decision not to go to a public meeting until those had been progressed.
So
Wednesday
people
the 2nd.
watching this on video should know that what we're talking about here is a meeting on the 2nd of May regarding tomato mushrooms, and what will be the agenda of the meeting.
Hastings District Council, the Hawke's Bay DHB and ourselves will all be presenting. We will be giving the community an update in relation to the activities that we've undertaken in response to the community's concerns about the odour issues, and also an update in terms of the resource consenting processes. So it's really an information exchange evening. I'm sure there'll be views on the merits of various actions by regulatory authorities and the company itself offered by the residents on the night.
Thank you very much. Do we have a mover? Thank you, Fenton. Seconded. Wish to speak? Wish to speak? Councillor Barker. Anyone else wish to speak? Otherwise, we'll move. All those in favour of accepting this report? Against? It's carried. Minor items not on the agenda. We started with, what was it? Tairawhiti.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, the reason I apologise to the Maori committee on the 10th, I think it was to attend a workshop as Deputy Chair of the Regional Transport Committee and local in Wairoa to look at issues as they pertain to the corridor from Napier to Portakey. They've cut it in half now, which actually makes quite a bit of sense. So the Gisborne north bit they're doing, and the Wairoa south bit, and we sort of meet in the middle, obviously between Wairoa and Gisborne, we're doing. And just really the reason I raise it here is this has been an ongoing discussion, but actually we're starting to get to the meaty bits now, looking at issues such as, one of the aims was to have an hour trip, Wairoa Napier, which takes 15 minutes off, takes quite a bit off a truck movement actually. And to do that, we need to shape up what the priorities are going forward, and deliver that to Wellington. So I think there is a discussion looming in the Regional Transport Committee about firming up some of these options and getting them onto a national table, if you like, to try and coax a bit of the pūtea in this direction. So it was talking to the likes of Jamie Cox, who's done years of this stuff. He actually thought we actually made some progress on the day. So I just thought it was worth sharing. Thank you.
It certainly is. An hour would be great. Councillor Dick, we'll go to your point because Debbie's out.
Yeah, just very briefly, Chair, I attended the Transport Summit. Transport Summit last week, Ministers Twyford, Jones and Genter, and that was attended by mayors and regional transport chairs, and just very briefly, there's some quite significant change in emphasis in the new government policy statement. There is going to be more money allocated for transport, and that's going to be funded in part by increases in the fuel taxes, 3 to 4 cents per litre each year for the next 3 years. A de-emphasis on state highway improvements, the funding for that's down 11%, and that they will finish the roads of national significance, but they're not intending to embark on major projects like that. Significant increases in support for public transport, up 46%, walking and cycling, up 248%, local roads, and increase regional improvements, which is appropriate to us, up 96%. A significant change in that the approach is now that that project should be transport mode neutral. In other words, the best transport mode is the one that should be used, and if it's rail, it's rail. If it's road or heavy vehicles, then that's what it is, but it's got to be proved by business case. Kiwi Rail will join the councils and NZTA in becoming an approved organisation, so they can bid for funding for rail improvements from the Land Transport Fund. The Provincial Growth Fund can be used or accessed in conjunction with the with national roading funds, and for a particular project both could be applied to. Now, the opposition has been saying that these changes will mean that there won't be any four-laning of the expressway. Well, that's not true. Four-laning of the expressway still stays in our present plan, but it's a few years out, and in any case, we really need to assess the results of the Whakatu Arterial and the Links Road major roundabout, the effect on the Huratonga Plains network, before we prioritise that sort of thing. So in very simple terms, that's where it is. I think it's changed in the right direction. Peter Reedy was there. I spoke to him. They're well underway with the improvements to the Napier Wairau line, and the likes of Main Freight Chief Executive was there and strongly promoted the use of rail in conjunction with road transport as the most efficient way of transporting people and goods.
Thank you, Chair. Last week I attended the Local Government NZ Zone 3 meeting, which was excitement personified. I managed to stay awake for the whole 2 days, which was quite good. But anyway, there were 3 items I thought were quite interesting. One was Fielding went through a process of the challenges they've had dealing with their wastewater and their wastewater treatment plant, which kind of reminded me of a lot of what was going on in Central Hawke's Bay and the time taken to deal with that issue. The other one was there was a big discussion around the issue with the firefighting spray foam at Hawke, and that every airport who uses that particular spray foam should be looking at their water testing to see that they're actually testing for that issue. Actually, I'll email Ian about that one. And then the other interesting note to make was that I spoke. There was a woman got up and spoke about the business development part of Horizons Regional or the Manawatu around the Manawatu district, and that they spend $200,000 a year on tourism promotion plus overheads, and they get a 5% growth, and they've had 5% growth in tourism over recent years. So I thought that was just an interesting analogy.
The Bell Group and something else, and she just thought she meant by raising it at the meeting and putting it on the agenda, she'd done what she wanted to say, was busy in Central Australia.
Chair, I just make the observation in relation to Arowana. Unfortunately, Ian's had to go, but Ian did attend on my behalf the meeting, and as I understand it, the principal focus of the day all returned back to the heavy level of sedimentation in the coastal waterways, both the rivers leading into the catchment there and into the marine environment, all driven by large-scale erosion of the hill country on that coastline, and a plea for assistance from this council for afforestation assistance, particularly in relation to properties proximal to the Aramoana Township. That is quite an advanced conversation now, and we are looking, subject to funding under the long-term plan, to coming to the party and assisting that community with afforestation of that erosion-prone landscape for the benefit of the freshwater and the coastal environment down there.
Thank you. I will talk a little bit. The Bell Group, for your information, won a Farmers Environmental Award. Paul Bailey and I went down to the field day on the farm. It was a really excellent field. Councillor Hewitt was there as well. And it was a really excellent farm visit. Really beautiful farm, and they're trying their best. According to them, they're not going to be able to make it in terms of Plan Change 6, so there's some very serious implications to that. It's my intention to go and have another chat to them. But it was a very good field day all down there, and as I say, they're really doing their best in terms of the environmental issues, and they won the award. So well done to them. So that's the end of our agenda for the council meeting. We need someone to take us out of into public excluded. Fenton, and all those in favour of going to public excluded? All right, we are now in